Welcome to the May session of the Riley Blake Table Topper of the Month. This month we're going to be working on the Bursting in Air patriotic themed table topper. What's great about this table topper is it is a variety of basic piecing units. So even if you're a beginner, this will be perfect to learn some basic common shapes that we use in quilting. And if you're an advanced beginner or a super advanced quilter, you won't have any problems putting together this table topper. So let's get started. So with this pattern, as always, first page covers all the cutting. So work your way through, including the kit has the navy solid. You have these navy kisses. This is what they refer to as navy kisses. We have a red solid, a red kisses, and then we have the cloud, which is the white. And the navy fabric includes the binding. Okay, so that is all set up for you. You're going to cut it out just like it shows here in the side. And I highly recommend labeling everything with the letters that it suggests so that you don't accidentally grab the wrong size piece for this project. Now, what we're going to do first is we're going to talk about half square triangles. So we're going to go and we're going to get the squares that we cut for your half square triangle units, which will be the 3-inch squares of the red solid and the 3-inch squares of the red kisses. And we're gonna go over how to make half square triangles. So on page 1 of your instructions is the basic information for half square triangles. So anytime throughout this pattern that they have you make a half square triangle, this is the method that you're going to complete. They are oversized, so they're a little bit bigger than what we need, so that good leaves us room to not be 100% accurate and still be able to end up with the size half square triangle that we need. We are going to take our 2 fabrics that they asked for, and in this project on page 2, the half square triangle unit is the corner block, and we're going to make 4 of them. So we actually need to make 16 half square triangles. We are going to take the 8 squares that we have labeled H and J. Okay. We are going to layer them right sides together, 1 fabric each, and we're going to mark a line from corner to corner. Okay. Our plan here is to sew a 1/4 inch away from each side of that line. Once we do that, we will cut on the line, and that will give us 2 half square triangles. Now, the goal here is to end up with 2 half square triangles that are at least 2.5 inches in size or bigger. We don't want anything that is smaller, so we need to be very conscious of where we sew in relation to this line. If we mark a really bold line, you're going to end up, maybe sewing farther away from this line, which is going to overall make your half square triangle smaller. So if anything, we want to air into the line so that we can make sure that we end up with a 2.5 inch square. So if we come over to the machine, I have a 1/4 inch presser foot on the machine right now. I have the edge of my 1/4 inch foot is sitting right on top of that line that I just sewed, and I'm going to sew 1/4 inch down this edge, making sure that I keep my foot on that line. When I get here to the end, I'm going to take my next unit and I'm going to make sure it's lined up. I'm just going to lift my foot and I'm going to slide that unit in, and we're going to sew. You're going to do that with all of your half square triangles, and then we're going to take them out. We will bring them back to the machine, flip them around, and now we're going to sew on this side of the half square triangle. Oops. This side of the line. I probably should put my glasses on so that I can see better. Okay. Now that you have your half square triangle sewn, we're going to take our ruler, we're going to cut it in half on the line that you originally drew. The next thing that we need to do is to square these units up to measure 2.5 inches square. And there's a couple of ways that you can do that. One, we can go ahead and press the unit. The directions suggest pressing the seam allowance open, okay? And then we're going to square this up to 2.5 inches. Or if you have the folded corner clipper ruler from Creative Grids that I actually spoke about and showed you in the very first table topper video that we did at the beginning of this year, the one that featured the bunny rabbit, we can actually use this to also square up half square triangles. So I'm going to show you how to do that first, and then I'll show you how to do that with a regular square ruler. So before you do any pressing with this unit, we're going to take, I kind of turn it on an angle. We're going to take the ruler, we're going to line up the diagonal line and that line that's printed right there with the seam that we just sewed. And we're going to line up the 2.5 inch mark right there at the bottom edge of our triangle. And we're going to make sure that we're all lined up here and at the bottom. I'm actually going to come up just a little bit. So you can see we have quite a bit here on the edge that we can use to square. So I'm actually going to come up a little bit because my fabrics don't quite meet straight right there. So we're going to come up. I'm going to cut across the top to get rid of that dog ear. And then I'm going to come down the side just like that. I'm then going to flip this over. I'm going to put the other unit there at the top, the other dog ear unit. I'm going to line up this edge exactly with that line I just trimmed, this unit here with the line I just trimmed, and I'm going to trim this. Now I have exactly a 2.5 inch square, okay, and I can now go press this with my seams open. The goal of a 2.5 inch square is that when you square it up, the diagonal line goes directly into the corner. If you square up this block and the diagonal is not in the corners, when you go to sew this in, you're gonna lose your point, okay? So that's one quick indicator that if you don't square it up right or have sewn something right, you're not gonna end up with a good point. So I'm gonna repeat that again. So I'm gonna line the diagonal edge of this ruler up with the diagonal, that first dark diagonal line there with my seam. I'm going to come down a little bit so that I can leave a little bit of excess for me to be able to trim. That way I'm able to trim all 4 edges. I'm going to trim across the top, down the side. I'm then going to flip this over. My newly trimmed unit is now here on my left. Again, lining 2.5 inches up at the bottom and at the side. And then I'm going to trim that direction. And then I'm going to go to the iron and I'm going to press this seam open. Now, if you don't have a folded corner clipper, not a problem. You may have another ruler similar. The Easy Angle can do that as well, but I'm going to show you how to do this with a square ruler. You can't really do it with a rectangular ruler because the 45-degree line on the rectangular rulers are not in the corner. So you need something where the 45 comes to the corner. So I'm going to lay this here. I'm going to line up the diagonal line on this ruler with the diagonal seam that's running down the middle. The first cut's always the hardest because it's possible that none of your edges are straight. So because this triangle is oversized, or this half square triangle unit's oversized, I will just kind of make sure I have a little bit past the 2.5 sticking out in either direction. This diagonal line is on corner to corner, and I'm just going to trim off just a little bit, okay? This way I can have a nice straight edge. My diagonal still goes into the corner. I'm going to rotate this so that the two edges that I just cut are now going to be underneath my ruler. I'm going to line up 2.5 with the edge of my nice trimmed line, and that diagonal line should again go corner to corner, and then I can trim the excess off. Okay, just like that. Now if you're left-handed, okay, it's just a matter of rotating the ruler. The same concept is the same. You're just kind of working with the ruler towards the top of the block versus towards the bottom of the block. And if you don't know, Creative Grids does make some left-handed rulers, a square ruler and a couple of rectangular rulers as well, so that your numbering is correct for you and you're not always having to read the ruler upside down as well. Okay, and trim that, and we will have our half square triangle unit. Now, what we're going to do is, according to the unit on page 2, we're going to lay out our pinwheel block. I still have to press these, but we're going to do it just like the picture shows. So you want to make sure that pretty much none of the same fabrics are touching. We are going to sew these two units together. We're going to sew these two units together, and we're going to press the seams opposite directions. Okay? And then we're going to then put this right sides together and sew across the middle. So now that our units are sewn together in twos, and we've pressed our seams in opposite directions, I always lay my unit back out, making sure that I have things still going in the right direction. We're now going to put these right sides together, and because we've pressed in opposite directions, these seams will nest. This will allow us to verify that that point directly in the center of our pinwheel is going to match. So I'm going to nest that seam. I'm going to make sure that they butt right up next to each other, and I like to pin either with the fork pins that I showed you before in a previous video, or pin on each side of that point. I do not like to pin directly into that middle because you will throw off the alignment of your matching seam. And then we're going to sew this together with a 1/4 inch seam. Now in the instructions they do have you press this seam open. I'm not going to press this open. I'm actually going to do it, like I said, opposite directions because I have a little bit different technique that I use here on the center. Have our unit is all nice and pressed. The next thing that we would do would be to go and press this seam. Now if we press this seam up or we pressed it down, it's going to be very bulky right here in the center, and so pressing this open to me still makes this super bulky. So anytime I have an intersection like this, I like to do what we call a swirl press. And swirl pressing is basically looking at the seam that we just sewed, and we're going to remove the few stitches that are outside of the seam that we just sewed that are part of the seam that sewed the original 2 blocks together. Okay, so it's just a couple of stitches that we are backing out just up to that line of sewing. Okay, we don't want to go past that line of sewing because then, you know, your block will fall apart. But those few little stitches, And then what that's going to allow is we can press one seam up and we can press the other seam down, and we'll end up with this little tiny little swirl in the middle. It'll look like a little miniature pinwheel, and this will lay much flatter and nicer. Okay, this block is going to be a 4.5 inch square, or 4 in whatever you end up with, but at least it should be the same wide as it is the same tall. All right, we'll make our pinwheel and then we'll move on to the next unit in our instruction. Now, let's learn about the sew and flip method. I'm going to teach the method that's in the pattern first, and then I'll come back and discuss the folded corner clipper for this project as well as you are more than welcome to go back and watch the table topper video from the bunny table topper that we did, where I thoroughly discussed the folded corner clipper method, and we'll link that here for you as well. In this project, we have two styles of flying geese that we need to make. Okay, we've got a flying geese that has a white center and two different color wings, and then we have a flying geese that has navy blue wings with this blue kisses center. So when you are constructing or working through your pattern, make sure you are paying attention to the images that are in the pattern and picking up the fabrics that are labeled with the appropriate letters that the pattern is telling you. We're going to start with the body of our flying goose here, which is 2.5 by 4.5. I'm going to take a wing. We are going to draw a line from corner to corner on the wrong side, and then we're going to place this right sides together. I just used a standard chalk pencil, chalk marker to draw that line on this darker fabric. We're then going to go to the machine and we're going to sew on that line. Okay, and I'd actually prefer that you actually sew a little bit to the right of that line, because we need this to fold back for us, and it needs to meet the edges of the body of our goose. If we sew too far in here, it's not going to fold back far enough, and it's just not going to be the result that you want, and you're never going to be able to get your flying geese to be the 2.5 by 4.5 that it needs to be. Okay, so we're going to come over to the machine. So I'm actually going to situate it so that I am like stitching just one thread past that marked line. And especially if you have, you're heavier handed and you've got a really big thick line there, you want to make sure that you sew closer to the corner that we're going to eventually cut off. Okay, but we also want to make sure that we do it in a way that we can make sure that the diagonal of this unit stays into the corner. Okay, so here it is. And if you can see, I'm just right outside that line. My test is if I can fold this fabric back and it meets the edges of my body of my goose, then I am good. Okay, I can then take my ruler, I can cut 1/4 inch away from that line and trim off that dog ear. You can also hold on to this if you'd like. You can run it back through the machine, sew 1/4 inch, and make a miniature little half square triangle that you can use for, a scrap project. And then we're going to press the seam open. This project is suggesting pressing seams open for your unit. And if you're curious how I know that, that indicator when you see the double arrow is telling you open. Okay, when you see these arrows, they're telling you which direction the seam allowance should press. Okay, so I'm gonna just finger press this. Now we need to repeat this step on the other side of the goose body. Now, if you have, And we're going to repeat that. We're going to sew to the outside of that line there, and then we will have our 2.5 by 4.5 inch flying goose. Okay, that's there. And then you will make those based upon the unit that you need to make. I'm going to talk about the parallelogram with the folded corner clipper because it's the same as the flying geese, except we have to pay attention to the direction that we place this piece of fabric. So with the flying geese, our second wing goes on so that it crosses over the first wing, okay? With a parallelogram, we're actually going to be sewing them in the same direction so that we get this parallelogram that's there, okay? So again, making sure that you pay close attention to your layout as to which direction things need to go. Okay, so we're going to take our body, and what the folded corner clipper does is it clips this dog ear off, okay, before we ever sew. I know that we're at 2.5, so I'm going to take my ruler, I'm going to line this 2.5 inch line up here at the bottom. I'm going to line the little line up here at the side, and then I'm going to pre-cut this corner. I can also take my wings, and I'm going to do the same thing. 2.5, line it up at that corner. This will allow me to put this right sides together, just like that, and then I'm going to go sew 1/4 inch. And that just skips, you know, not really skip a step, it just puts the steps in a little bit of a different order for us to do. So let's go and sew this. So I'll line up my engineered squared off corners there. Get everything lined up. So 1/4 inch. On the parallelogram unit, you're also going to be pressing this seam open as well. Okay. Now the same would happen this direction if I was doing, we want to cut the same corner off, going in the same direction. Put my unit on here and we'll sew 1/4 inch. Okay, I took the ruler, I cut the same angle as I did before, did the same, repeat the steps here with my background triangle. Forgot to clip that one corner dog ear. It's okay. We can do that when we get it sewn on. Okay, and again, we're going to press these seams open according to the pattern. Here we go. And this unit will be a 2.5 by 4.5 inch rectangle. Okay, this is going to become the units that work into our table topper. You have some parallelogram units that have navy blue in the center. You have some parallelogram units that have the navy kisses in the center. Okay, and then you have some parallelogram units that contain both the white, the navy, and the kisses. So just make sure that you pay attention in your pattern to pages 3 for creating the parallelogram unit, and you won't have any issues. Okay. All right, so let's get all that out of the way. And then we have 2 more different style units to create, and the next unit is what we call a house block. Okay, so a house block has that same folded corner triangle that's happening just in one edge. Okay, so it starts with a square versus a rectangle, and we're going to do that same sew and flip method, but we're going to do it in the upper corner. So that's, we call it a house because it kind of looks like a house when it's finished. There's our roof. We have a couple of different units with the house unit. You have 4 units that just contain the white with a red solid in the left corner. And then you have 8 units that contain the white with the red kisses in the left corner and a second corner done with the red solid. So make sure that, again, you pay attention to your instructions, and we'll tell you if you label your fabrics, it's going to help, okay? Making sure that you don't get confused in your layout. The last unit that we need to make is a square and a square unit, okay? This is going to be this unit right here. It is a sew and flip unit, but we're going to sew and flip 2 opposite corners at a time. Okay, so you want to make sure that when you do this, you want to do these 2 corners. So again, I would draw a line, and then we're going to sew. Here, let me get a marker that you can see. We're going to sew those lines. We will clip and fold these corners back, okay? And then we will repeat the process in the other 2 corners. Then we'll come back and we'll do this corner and fold back, and then repeat with the final corner to give you a square and a square unit there in the quilt. With that square and a square unit, all the seams are being pressed open, and the instructions are at the bottom of page 3. Okay. Now, let's take a look at page 3 starts assembling the corner blocks of our project. So let's take a look here. So we have 4 corners of our project. They're made up of the pinwheel and the house units. Follow your layout that's on page 3 to create your corner blocks. Pay very, very close attention to the direction of these parallelograms in your unit. It is very easy to flip them or get them going in the wrong direction. So lay them all out, stack them all up, and then you will be able to just chain piece all 4 units. After we get our corner units done, we're going to start with the center units that we have here. Okay. We are going to, that's made up of your square and a square units, a parallelogram unit, and some flying geese. So you'll piece 4 of these, okay, so they come out from the center. And then you will have 1 center block that you have pieced as well. Once you have your block, let's see. This sashing unit, this corner block or middle block, should be 8.5 by 12.5. This center block unit here should be a 12.5-inch square in each corner. And then your center blue star should be an 8.5-inch square, okay, here in the center. We'll lay it out, we'll piece it just like you piece anything else. Blocks into rows, rows into a quilt top. Again, seams all being pressed open for everything. There are a lot of bulky seams coming together for this project, and you will get much prettier intersections as well as much prettier, flatter table topper if you press your seams open like they suggest in the pattern. So that here is the back side of the table topper. Once you have your center together, we are going to now put the borders on our project. Okay, so the borders on our project, we have a little corner unit that needs to be sewn to the border. Okay, so this is part of the corner block. So we have this little sew and flip here. We have a little sew and flip on this border piece, and then we have a half square triangle that happens in the corner. And you can see that on page 5 of your table topper. You want to make sure on the corners that you make sure that when you sew these little corner flips on, that they're going the right direction when you flip them. Okay? So pay very close attention. You don't want to accidentally sew the wrong angle. So it may help to lay it out and kind of preview the corner square before you sew it on. We will sew on the side borders, and then you'll sew the half square triangles to the top and bottom border and then attach that to your quilt top. Once you have everything together, this should measure 36.5 inches square for your table topper. You can layer and then quilt. Now that your table topper is pieced, let's talk about the quilting options. The quilting shown here is perfect quilting for completing with a walking foot. None of this has to be done with free motion. Actually, looking at this, maybe the only thing she did free motion would be this little swirl that's kind of happening in the outer border. But I really think you could do that with a walking foot as well. But if we look at where she started, let's start in the middle and work our way out. Simple X, right through the middle square. Nothing fancy. She comes out to these parallelograms that are happening diagonally out from the center. And she's just kind of gone from one corner, marked a point kind of towards the center, and then went into the opposite corner and did the same on the opposite side. She's also treated that this unit, these units right here, they're actually part of the flying geese. So they're two flying geese that came together to create the visual of a parallelogram. And she's quilted these units the same as she's done here. Or you could just echo quilt this unit if you like. You could just stitch, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch away from the edge. All the way around on all the units. She's done the same in the outer corner parallelograms. The corner units, as well as these square and a square units that are coming through the center, she's done a little twist. So you just start in one corner and then arc into the next corner and then bounce to the next corner and then keep your way around. In these particular units, you could actually do this in one fell swoop. So we start at 12 o'clock, you're going to come to 3, come to 6, and then come down to 3 in the second block, 6, 9, 12 at the top of the second block, and then jump back up to 6, 9, and 12 again. So you can actually make it all the way around that square and a square center unit in one thread stop. And then the background is just quilted with straight lines. It is a lot of stopping and start that she has because she's not quilting over that particular area. If you don't want to stop, you could easily kind of stitch in the ditch and travel around these particular blocks, but it's completely up to you. And then the outer border just has that little swirl, and the corners have the same shape as the other square and the squares in the center. So make sure that you, if you have any questions about the folded corner clipper or fold back method and that I didn't get answered here, I would definitely check out the table topper bunny video that we did at the beginning of the year, which again, we'll link here for you, and that will kind of help that. But I think that with this particular project, you're not going to have any problem at all putting this table topper together. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next month for our next project.